As the curtains rose on the national championship night, myself, along with the entire world, sat in raw tension as Georgia prepared to kick it off to the Horned Frogs. This may have been the most highly anticipated national championship game in a very long time, and let me give you some backstory as to why. Georgia at this point is a towering Goliath, sitting at 14-0 after going through the SEC, arguably the hardest conference to get that type of record in, and the way they got there was in no minor fashion. They didn't scrape and claw their way through the trenches of gritty games. They were like an AC-130, showering unknown soldiers below with a barrage of bullets, obliterating everything in their path with seemingly no resistance. From the very first game where the Oregon Ducks came down to Athens just to get bitch slapped 49-3, all the way back to the opposite side of the country, through a surprisingly close game at Missouri of all places, which did nothing more than just prove that they were human and did have a little bit of grit to them as they had to come from behind in a 14-point fourth quarter to pull out the win, and then to their first bout with a highly ranked Tennessee where they put them under their boot. Don't let the two-score final score fool you. This game felt like 1,000,000 through the duration of it, as you watch the number one seed realize that their title was just given to them for the sake of controversy, as that badge was snatched off their dead corpse, just to take on LSU in the conference championship and crush their will in the first quarter, their soul in the second quarter, and their hopes for winning in the second half. It was a brutality of a season that we haven't seen since the prime Saban-led Alabama days. And speaking of Alabama, but we'll easily say that they were the best two-loss team in the country, bar none. So after going a perfect 15-0, we all knew they were a shoo-in for the playoffs. Now, let's look at their opponent, the TCU Horned Frogs, who are on the polar opposite end of the spectrum from Georgia. You see, their games were anything but guaranteed wins most of the time. Yes, they had a blowout win against Oklahoma, who later turned out to be just not in their prime this year. The Jayhawks played them hard, but the story this year was that their games reflected the gritty, rough, and tough personality of their quarterback, Max Duggan, a man who'd put his head down, tuck that ball, and guarantee the first down no matter how much punishment it would be. We'd see that grit against Oklahoma State, which needed 2 overtimes to win, and again taking on a rough portion of their schedule with back-to-back wins against a strong Longhorn team in Memorial Stadium, where they'd grind out a 17-10 win, followed by taking a trip to McLean Stadium in Waco to grind out a single-point victory against the Bears, where they'd get a chance to go to the Big 12 championship, take it to overtime again, but this time the coin would land on tails. Now it was up to the committee to decide their fate, as they were part of just a couple of high-powered 1 or 2 loss teams, notably Alabama and Ohio State, who just lost to Michigan after both teams thought that they were deserving of the number 1 seed, going through an undefeated regular season, and Alabama noting their strength of schedule despite their 2 losses as to why they should get a bid. And in my opinion, all these teams had cases. Bama lost twice, but lost close and had some big blowout wins against good opponents. Ohio State only lost to the Badgers in the Big Ten despite a not particularly strong strength of schedule, with their only notable wins going up against a very overhyped Notre Dame team early in the season and a Penn State team at Penn State, which is never going to be an easy win for them. Despite this, the committee decided that Georgia would be the number 1 seed, Michigan would be the number 2 seed, and Ohio would be the number 4 seed, leaving TCU at the 3rd seed. For much of the college world, the red imposter alarms were blaring, as many felt like TCU was outclassed. The other teams had obliterated their opponents all season. I mean, Ohio State's closest game, aside from their loss to the number 3 ranked team in the country, was a 12-point lead in what felt like a blowout as they rolled the Nittany Lions for 28 points in the fourth, like they had just been toying with their food all game. Many wanted Georgia to take on TCU early and then get a good battle for who they felt like was the real winner against the Michigan and Ohio State team to take on the Bulldogs in the championship. Heck, most people had already overlooked the Frogs, assuming that they'd just roll over and die in the first round, happy to be a part of the playoffs at all. But what we'd get instead is arguably the best first round of playoffs in the history of the playoffs. Ohio State came in and lived up to every bit of their reputation. matching and beating Georgia at sometimes in their own game of high-powered offense as CJ Stroud torched the Georgia defense for 4 touchdowns and 350 yards. But Georgia managed to stay in it. Stetson Bennett has the best game he had all season, putting up almost 400 yards of offense and 3 touchdowns in an absolute nail-biter as UGA reminds everyone in the fourth why they're the #1 seed, putting up 18 points in that fourth quarter to just barely squeak out a victory as we get arguably the worst game-winning field goal attempt in modern history for what could have easily been an Ohio State victory. Now for the cupcake rats, the Wolverines come out and, wow, and they're getting stomped. 21-6 at halftime, and now the Horned Frogs are stepping with them every single bit of the way. The TCU Horned Frogs are living up to their own reputations as the Wolverines keep firing and firing, but holy cow, the grit of this TCU team. We are late in the fourth quarter, and they are holding on to a 6-point lead with under a minute left, and just like that, the game is over with another unexpectedly exhilarating match as the Horned Frogs are just a game away from completing their Cinderella story, taking us back to the beginning of this video. From unranked to national championships, and what better opponent for this TCU team to go up against than one of the most dominating college football teams we've ever seen. Yeah, that, what you're feeling, is how it felt. The game ended with a final score of 65-7, and before most people could even comprehend what was happening, the game was over. And in the history of 2 teams contending for who was the best in the nation, there has never been a loss as bad or as brutal as this one. The next closest is perhaps a 21-0 victory of Alabama over LSU in 2012. Heck, maybe even a 62-24 Nebraska win in '95 to claim the crown. But even the most extreme cases before this have victors with no more than a 38-point margin. This game had that beat by 28 whopping points with a 58-point margin. And disappointed isn't even the right word for how people felt. We felt failed. We felt cheated somehow. How could 2 teams just a week ago that played so well in a 4-team tournament result in a second pairing of games that was this monstrosity? And most importantly, can we predict it? Could we have seen this coming? And the answer, I will tentatively say, is yes. We should have known, at least to some degree. And here are my thoughts as to why. It comes down to one sort of concept, and that's the time for preparation. You see, where TCU shined was also their downfall. They always knew how to do just enough with a week of preparation to put themselves in position to potentially outgrit their opponent. They'd get those extra couple of yards. Like I said, they dropped their shoulder and powered through using superior toughness to get extra wins against equally and sometimes better matched opponents. Their team played good, complementary football, but would do so without one side shining consistently. But often improper preparation meant that they didn't consistently just stomp teams they should have stomped. But if you say give them 4 weeks to prepare for an opponent like they did against Michigan, they could make up for that weaker preparatory skills mid-season. And look, they used their grit and their time wisely and were able to squeak off a very unpredicted win against a team that probably has them completely outclassed on offense and defense. The problem is they didn't have another 4 weeks to prepare for the next opponent. Whether it was Ohio State or Georgia, the proof is in the pudding. Both of those teams are going to get your film a week before. They were going to break it down, dissect it, pick apart your offense and your defense unless you were coming with something new that week, and they were going to beat you at it. And that was it. That's what these teams are good at. That's how you become undefeated in the regular season, and it's my belief that it didn't matter which team TCU saw in the final. The outcome would have been the same way that it's also my belief that TCU could have seen either team in the previous round and they would have played them just as close, if not beating them there too. Now, I don't believe we could have predicted how bad this game was going to be, but realistically, I think we all knew, despite our best hopes and wishes, that this was going to be a decisive Georgia victory due to the things I just stated above. But I'd honestly love to know your guys' thought. Do you think you were able to see this coming? As always, let me know in the comments. Have a good day and peace.